so that we can record this session. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the last session of the 2019 Free Learning Conference presented by App State. This is the 320 session, and I'm Emily Wilson. I'm your Zoom co-host today, or co-pilot. As a reminder, this session is being recorded in Zoom, and it will be available later on the conference website. This session is titled Designing More Meaningful Virtual Student Hours Experiences, and I'm pleased to introduce Phil Edwards from UNC Chapel Hill. If you will, make sure that your mic is muted unless you are ready to speak and ask a question. We want you to feel like you can do that, but if you will mute until you're ready to do that, that helps reduce the amount of feedback in the background. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Phil. Thank you, Phil.
Sure. Thanks, Emily. And thanks, Emery, for sort of coordinating a lot of the events today. It's wonderful to see everyone who is connecting remotely. And it's really nice to be able to sort of end the day thinking about the ways in which we would use Zoom in a really meta kind of way, particularly around student office hours, but maybe we'll get a chance in this very lightning, fast-paced talk to sort of experience what this might be like as a student as well. Just to give us a sense of maybe where we're headed in this 30 minutes, wanted to just briefly frame what we think about when we think about the difference between an office hour and a student hour, get a chance to think about what our students might expect from this kind of experience, walk through one potential way to use Zoom as a platform for conducting sessions like this, and then a chance to really dive into like, well, would this work for you, or what ways could you see that being tweaked to be more applicable to your context? As bonus content, we can also go into talking about some of the ways that you might schedule various times with students, whether or not they are accompanied with a Zoom kind of platform. But for folks who have not been exposed to Office 365 bookings, if you're on a Microsoft campus, or a tool like Calendly, if you're on a Google campus, although it also works with Microsoft too, just to give you some additional flavors of things that might happen here. So I wanted to kind of toss out this distinction between what we think of as office hours and student hours. Student hours is a term of art that has sort of been emerging when we think about like the ways in which students might misunderstand or mischaracterize or sort of come in with misconceptions around like what is it that actually happens in an office hour. This is particularly true for students who are first gen. Also, international students might have a different way of reading this, but I think the topic is opaque enough that it's maybe worth having a distinction between these two particular concepts. I've just given two examples here of like what we might typically see in a syllabus or in a LMS around office hours. The top one is one that I have pulled from a very, very old syllabus of mine. Office hours, they are Monday through Wednesday, or Monday and Wednesday from 1 to 2:30 or by appointment. Very centric on like being in a physical space, and this is kind of about me just locating myself. What actually happens in that time is not discussed at all. I've included sort of a, not necessarily a perfect description of how this might look from a student hours perspective, but one that I think has some interesting characteristics to highlight. Giving students a sense of like the kinds of things that they might come to us with. Even in cases where they don't have questions, but just want to kind of, talk or get some ideas for things. They can be generative as well. For folks who are reading this, trying to frame it around the way, around this being a welcoming environment for students. This is not somehow an obligation that we have to undertake, but it is something that is designed for students to benefit from in whatever ways would be meaningful to them. So we're going to talk about student hours and think of that as a replacement for office hours as we move through it, but this session together. But I do want to sort of raise this distinction as like maybe we can raise our expectations and be more clear about what students are in a position to do during this time and share that with them clearly. So just to kick us off here, in the Zoom chat, if you are connected and at your keyboard, I wanted you to share your perspectives on the kinds of things that students may expect from student hours, or in this case, even virtual student hours. So things that are not necessarily in one place, in an office, at one a fixed point in time, but that might be more broadly, or that would be available to students who are remote. What are some things that you think students might expect or might be able to expect from us in this time that we have devoted to supporting them one-on-one? I've given a couple of examples below, like they might ask questions about assignments, they might ask us about our research. I put ask us about our research as sort of a stretch goal. That would be a wonderful, wonderful way to spend 15 to 20 minutes with a student. Please share whatever perspective you have on this particular question in the Zoom group chat. Yes, yes, all kinds of questions. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we might expect it to be a little less formal. We might expect students to be connecting with maybe not even necessarily more urgent or time-sensitive needs, but possibly closer to the point of need. Like if they are writing a paper in their dorm room or off campus, or after hours at their workplace, we might be able to really tap into giving feedback closer to the time that they actually have questions. Any other perspectives you'd like to share based on your experiences? Yeah, maybe less purposeful. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I've answered legitimate time-sensitive research questions at 10 in the Target parking lot. I've been there, empathize completely. Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. Yeah, and for any librarians joining us, the virtual reference services and sort of question answering platforms for this are also ways we can field these kinds of questions. Mm-hmm. Yeah, LMS questions. So like, okay, how do I find this thing in Canvas when I might have been used to Moodle or Blackboard or Sakai? So some might be sort of technical navigating things. Some might be questions related to the content of the course. I've had students in my physical office hours come and express what are some very sensitive subjects, things about things that might be impeding them from being able to engage as they would have hoped in the course, and also having that kind of experience translate to online as well. Mm-hmm. So if we have these sort of varying ways that students might interact, we might expect that the translation from a physical office where students might be lined up outside the door in an ideal world, where we're talking with students one-on-one with the door open, or in some cases maybe the door cracked or propped, or by appointment at any other time. We might want to try and replicate some of these ideas about sort of privacy, confidentiality, being able to provide students with an environment in which they can feel comfortable sharing whatever it is that they have to share with us. Some of the things that might be more innocuous around the details of the course or the LMS might be less sensitive topics, but students who are also talking about accommodations, for instance, might not want to do that while standing in line or a group of students are kind of waiting right outside. So how do we go about doing this if we have a virtual platform? I wanted to just give sort of one example to make this a little bit more concrete of how this might play out using Zoom. And this is sort of a walkthrough in a series of steps. These are things that I have done in my teaching that have seemed to address some of these concerns around what if students want to talk in private, how do we do that in a platform that could enable such a thing to happen and to do it deliberately. The first step is in the meeting options for the meeting room that you create. And I would encourage folks who are interested in using virtual office hours as a component of their teaching to, if you're using Zoom, to create a different meeting room for this to happen. So not your personal room where you might have all kinds of chats going on, and maybe not the same room that you would have for the course if it were being taught online, but to have a separate room dedicated to office hours where this particular meeting option, enable waiting room, is checked. The reason that enable waiting room being checked is kind of important, is that this is the message that students will see when they try to connect to this particular room. So a very gently worded, please wait, the meeting host will let you in soon, kind of message that gets sent. While this is all happening in your separate Zoom room where you've got enable waiting room on, you have the time to go in and create breakout rooms in advance of any students actually entering this space. So I have just gone and in the process of generating rooms, we'll just generate an arbitrary number, possibly more than I'd need, of individual breakout rooms within Zoom where no one is assigned to them. So when students are coming into this room and you've enabled the waiting room, you'll see something like in the upper right-hand corner here that one person is waiting for a sort of admission to this meeting room broadly. That is one way to kind of manage the milling around, or like students seeing other students waiting for office hours, or any other kind of crosstalk or chatter that might be difficult to sort of wrap one's arms around. After we let that person in, then we're in a situation where we can add that new person into one of the breakout rooms. So I've just added this fictional student to breakout room number 1. If there were more students who were also in the queue to enter the room, I might let them enter one by one and assign them to individual breakout rooms as they come in. So to get through the first initial wave of whoever has shown up at 1 o'clock on a Tuesday. I also have the ability then, as the host of this room, to join any of these rooms after they are opened. So I would join sequentially the room that Eve is in, have some conversation around what she was interested in discussing in this particular context. If it ended up being sort of a bigger conversation, we might shift gears into a one-on-one sort of assigned time to meet, as opposed to this office hours setting. Or if it was a quick question, we would sort of move through it relatively quickly. At the end of this, so we will end up in a breakout room together. We can have this conversation, just the two of us, that isn't visible to the rest of the students who might be waiting or might have joined the room, or who are waiting in other breakout rooms as we speak. I have the opportunity as the host then to leave this breakout room and leave Eve in there and go to visit other students along the way. So this process can kind of repeat itself. And I'm wondering if there are, at this point, any questions that you've got around the process of doing this, or sort of what concerns this addresses and what concerns that this might leave outside of the scope here. Any questions before we do this? We're going to do something that I hope is not too meta for this, but I'm actually going to ask Emily if she would graciously transfer over, oh, I see she's done it, transferring over hosting abilities to me. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and welcome us all back. I'm now going to share, and hopefully this will not lead to too much difficulty. I'm actually going to share I'm going to go ahead and just share my desktop with you. So, okay, so you should be seeing some things that look fairly similar to what we've been talking about thus far. Let me open up the chat again. Wendy's question before we dive in, what if students don't have access to a webcam for virtual office or student hours? There is also the opportunity, and we'll see this in the Zoom invitation, for individuals to call on the phone and be connected via audio. It has not been my policy to require that they turn on a webcam, but if they have access to a phone, they could have access to this space as well. They will get audio notifications of being sort of moved into places. Yeah, so phone would definitely be an option with this as well. how you sort of communicate this link to students either through the LMS or through a dedicated page where this information is contained. You could include the dial-in numbers there as well. So what I'm going to try and do here. Oops. Oh, my apologies. Let me fumble with the technology for one moment with your indulgence. Ah, I see what's happening. So we are not configured at the moment to also see the Zoom rooms in here, but I wanted to give you at least a chance to experience what this might be like. Oh, Emily, would you mind re-hosting me again? There we go. I have options.
You have the right access now.
Yes, I do. It is great. So here's what's going to happen. So I am going ahead to manually create, as you saw in this example, those 10. I'm going to arbitrarily create 20 rooms. Everyone who is in there, I am currently assigning you to a breakout room. This is something that we sort of skipped the step of the waiting room to actually enter Zoom. I'll keep Emily out, and I will put everybody else in, including Emery. I'm setting some options so that you are able to return to the session at any time. But I'd encourage you to stay in your rooms for a minute, because I want you to be able to see what this sort of looks like. I'm going to open up all of these rooms. You should now have an invitation to join. So I'm seeing people join, moving into breakout rooms. The main room is becoming less populated. Great, 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 great. I'm going to wait until everyone has accepted their invitation. And I'm just typing a message to broadcast to all of the rooms saying, and from this point, I can announce which breakout room I am currently visiting. So that message should have been broadcast to folks. I'm going to go ahead and close the room so that everybody will come back. And I see folks leaving their rooms. The rooms have all closed. So we are all forced back into this space. And in terms of the process, so I realize that we haven't had a chance to go in and visit each room individually to offer feedback. You can imagine how, if you had to scale this process to accommodate 30 students who arrived at once, that maybe some adjustments would be made on the fly. But for being able to manage 4 or 5 students via this mechanism over an hour, hour and a half, it may very well be a one suitable strategy for doing so. Any reflections that you've got on sort of moving into a breakout room, being able to have some information broadcast to you from the outside about status, anything about this experience that you think, or characteristics of that experience that you think are worth highlighting, either as, wow, this is a strength of this, or this is something that is particularly challenging? Just drop those ideas into the group chat if you wouldn't mind. what reflections do you have as individuals who have been sequestered to breakout rooms and then called back as a small microcosm of this process? Oh, having trouble getting anyone to show up. That's a great question. Ah, uh, the cleverly named Philbo Baggins has suggested, it might not be a challenge, but I'm curious how recording works. The breakout rooms themselves, and I would suggest that maybe the entire office hours Zoom room that you create is probably not the kind of thing that you would record. There is some potential chilling effect, I would imagine, from having students enter a space that has the red recording button on there in terms of what they would ask. Ashley's question, students who are afraid of technology and don't want to participate. Yeah, I think that using something like this as a I expect you all to know how to do this from the outset is probably a strategy that is will lead to failure. One of the ways that I have actually used this process in the delivery of courses is to incorporate this as a class activity for the online students who I work with, so that we get a chance to practice what this looks like a little bit. Yes, having breakout rooms for multiple students hasn't been a challenge. Oh, sorry. Oh, I see. Emery's thought continued. I have trouble getting any to show up, so having breakout rooms for multiple students hasn't been a challenge. Sure. I think that is encouraging them to see this space as an opportunity for them to be supported by us can be particularly tricky with this. What kinds of ways could you frame an experience like this? This is broadly a question to the room. What kinds of ways could you frame this sort of experience? Or if we want to think about it, could you frame your face-to-face office hours in such a way that would encourage students to show up? If you have suggestions or ideas, please feel free to drop them in the chat. Any suggestions from the room on how you would frame office hours, virtual or not, as inviting kinds of environments for students? Let me ask you a slightly different question then. I realize it is late in the day. What are some adaptations that you could make of this singular example that you think would be appropriate for the kinds of work that you do with students in a variety of contexts, classroom-based instruction, online instruction, or external to courses kinds of interactions? Mm-hmm. Yeah, Emery's suggestion here, trying to frame it as an opportunity to enrich rather than dealing with problems. Yeah, if we talk about office hours, virtual or not, as being this is the space that you come if you have misunderstood or made a mistake in something, and this is to fix those problems, it becomes a lot more difficult to have students who don't want to be perceived as, or who don't feel like they have been struggling with the material, to also have a reason to come. Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. Other thoughts for how you might sort of adapt or frame an experience like this? Emily's comment, I work with adults, not college students, but I can see this being a great option for some of our leadership coaching. We have a project component that will require periodic check-ins, and it will be much more convenient for our professionals. Yeah, if there is a population who is your primary clientele, who just doesn't have to be in the same physical location as any kind of drop-in opportunities you would offer, this is a great way to sort of normalize interacting outside of maybe the formal programs that you're responsible for, and being able to provide some kind of guidelines for this. Yeah, Philbo's question, maybe framing it as more of a collaborative session with you as an instructor, you as instructor more of a moderator for the dialogue and less instruction during the session. Sure. I mean, if your office hours could be an open invitation to talk, or if the office hour space that you try and create is one that is communal, where you are expecting the students would talk about things with you and other students in the room, that would also be another way to kind of frame or package this in a way that could make it more appealing to students, or appealing to students who have a broader range of concerns they want to talk about that aren't necessarily fixing problems. Okay. I will take, my plan is to take the transcript from this chat too and sort of incorporating it into these slides. So you'll have access to some of these outside of the chat itself. Yeah, so I always like the idea of giving students a space to own the content and help each other. We've done that a bit with discussion boards, but this might be a different medium for it. Sure, I can definitely see the parallels between something that might have been an asynchronous discussion where resources were being shared or collaboration was around ideas was unfolding. Folks who also incorporate asynchronous discussion boards for students to ask questions about the course is another sort of public mechanism, or public to the course mechanism, where students can ask questions and receive answers that others can see. Yes, I think we're definitely going to make a T-shirt of the Own the Content and Help Each Other. We will send you royalty checks along the way. I just wanted to touch on one final piece, just for folks who have not necessarily seen this before. These are, and I'll just give you a really brief, possibly too brief summary of this. Some folks have been reluctant to like just have students show up or not show up for things. If having a more rigid sort of sign-up structure, like to guarantee 15 minutes for a student to come in at a particular time. Microsoft Bookings is one example that some of our faculty have decided to use. This is just a very arbitrary sample for my account. Being a Microsoft campus, as UNC Chapel Hill is, you'll see that there are times for August 21st that are 8:30 and 8:45. My actual calendar for that day is blocked off from basically 9 through the end of the workday. So only times that are free in your Outlook calendar that is connected to Office 365 bookings would be available to students. The other option that I wanted to just make sure folks were aware of is Calendly. Calendly is a third-party service that is not necessarily available for enterprise-wide licensing, that will connect to things like Google Calendar, iCloud Calendar for those who use different platforms, as well as Office 365 or Outlook, which gives you a similar kind of interaction here, to be able to select a date and a time for a 15-minute meeting with someone. So if adding some additional structure and schedule would be helpful, these are some tools that will allow you to do it. If being able to use Zoom as a platform to sort of manage folks as they come in and to give them opportunities for privacy or collective work, then that also may be an option for you. Thank you for bringing up some questions around framing of all of these things. And if there's any final questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or turn on your mic. Otherwise, I thank you for your time to sit through this, and thanks for all of your input throughout this session. Awesome. Thanks, Phil. Thanks, Emery. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Phil. It's been great.
Yes. Have a wonderful, yes, I see thank yous coming across. Great. We're all done as far as I'm concerned. Thank you so much for attending, and good luck with trying to adapt some of these practices to your own work.
Sounds great. Bye, everybody.